Welcome back, deep divers. Today we are diving deep into a topic you all specifically requested, the world of coffee.
Yeah, it's everywhere, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, it's everywhere. And to make this deep dive extra special, we're brewing up a blend of historical accounts, cultural insights, and even a peek into how coffee shapes our world today.
That's right. So grab your favorite mug, get comfortable, and let's dive in.
All right. So I have to ask, where does this whole coffee adventure even begin?
Well, we have to travel back in time to the Ethiopian highlands.
Ooh, sounds exciting.
It is. Legend has it that a goat herder named Kaldi noticed his goats getting a little, well, extra energetic after munching on some red berries.
Okay, so I'm already intrigued. Energetic goats. That's not something you see every day.
Right. So Kaldi, being a curious fellow, he tries the berries himself, and boom, the energy boost hits him too. And that's supposedly how coffee was discovered.
Wow. So coffee was like a natural energy drink discovered by accident?
Pretty much. Now, the exact details of the Kaldi story, they might be lost to time, but it really highlights how important coffee is to Ethiopia. It's considered the birthplace of coffee, and many believe the word coffee might even come from the Ethiopian province of Kaffa.
Really? Wow, I had no idea. So Ethiopia is where it all began? But I have a feeling coffee didn't stay put for long, did it?
Oh, you're absolutely right. From Ethiopia, coffee traveled to Yemen, and then it spread throughout the Middle East. By the 15th century, it was a big part of life and trade there. Actually, coffee beans were even traded through the Yemeni port of Mocha,
Wait a minute, mocha as in the coffee drink?
the one and only.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
I'm
I'm
not-
ordering a mocha latte with a whole new appreciation now.
Right, it's amazing, isn't it?
But what I find even more interesting is how coffee became more than just a drink, like a social thing.
You're right on the mark. In the Middle East, coffee wasn't just a drink, it was a social catalyst. Coffee houses, or coffee canes, popped up everywhere, becoming these vibrant community centers.
Coffee canes, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, just imagine scholars deep in debate, artists showing their work, everyday people catching up on news, all over steaming cups of coffee.
That sounds a lot like today's coffee shops, actually.
Exactly. That social aspect of coffee has been brewing for centuries.
It's fascinating how those traditions carry over.
Yeah, and that tradition continued as coffee traveled across the Mediterranean to Europe, brought over by Venetian traders in the 17th century.
I can just picture those Venetian merchants introducing this exotic new drink to the cafes of Venice.
Right, so you think they're instantly hooked? Well, not quite. Coffee actually faced some resistance when it first arrived in Europe.
Really? Why?
It was seen as a threat to those traditional European beverages like beer and wine. Some even thought it was a dangerous foreign influence.
That's wild. Hard to imagine coffee causing such a stir. So what was it about coffee that people found so threatening?
Think about it. Coffee was new, it was stimulating, and it was becoming super popular, especially in those new coffee houses. And guess what? Those coffee houses quickly turned into hotspots for intellectual and artistic exchange, especially during the Enlightenment.
So coffee houses were like the social media of their time. Places where ideas were debated, revolutions were brewed.
Exactly. And as coffee spread across Europe, different coffee cultures started to pop up too. In Italy, they fell in love with espresso, while in Turkey, they preferred strong coffee brewed in a seve.
A sesve? What's that?
It's a special pot that makes this rich, intense coffee Turkish style.
Wow. So coffee's journey really shaped how we drink it today and the whole culture around it. From those highlands in Ethiopia to the Middle East and now Europe, coffee was already a global thing. But I know there's more to the story. Coffee still had to reach the Americas, right?
Absolutely. And that part of coffee's journey, well, let's just say it adds another layer of complexity to this already fascinating saga.
Ooh, I'm ready to hear all about it. But before we get into that, I have to share a few fun coffee facts I stumbled upon, just to keep things lively.
All right, hit me with them. What have you got?
Okay, this one blew my mind. Did you know that Beethoven, the famous composer, was a huge coffee lover?
No way, really?
Seriously. He was so particular about his coffee that he would count out exactly 60 beans for every single cup.
Wow. I never knew that. Maybe those carefully counted beans fueled those amazing symphonies.
Maybe. All right, ready for another one?
Bring it on.
Okay, so most of the world's coffee is grown in a specific region called the Coffee Belt. It sits between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn.
Makes sense. With all that warm sunshine coffee plants love.
Right. And last but not least, have you ever heard of Kopi Luwak?
That rings a bell. It's that super expensive coffee, right? Something to do with.
Yeah, it's the one that's, well, processed by civet cats. They eat coffee cherries and the beans pass through their digestive system.
Oh, right, right. That's definitely one of the more unique coffee facts I've heard.
Makes you wonder who figured that one out, huh?
Seriously. But hey, it shows how diverse and surprising the coffee world can be.
It really does. All right, so now that we've had our fun fact break, are you ready to cross the Atlantic? I'm eager to hear how coffee went from a local drink to a global powerhouse.
Let's dive in. The story of coffee in the Americas is a fascinating blend of agricultural expansion, economic booms, and a complex legacy that still shapes the industry today.
Okay, so we've traced coffee from those legendary beginnings in Ethiopia through the Middle East all the way to Europe. Now we're ready to explore its arrival in the Americas. How did coffee take root in this new world?
Well, coffee first appeared in the Americas around the 18th century. It quickly transformed the landscape, turning huge areas into those sprawling plantations we often picture.
I can just imagine those vast coffee plantations stretching as far as the eye can see. It must have completely reshaped the Americas, right?
Absolutely. The arrival of coffee in the Americas had this huge economic impact. It also, unfortunately, became entangled with colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade.
That's a dark side of history we can't ignore.
Definitely. That demand for coffee in Europe and around the world, it fueled the growth of these massive plantations. And tragically, they depended on the forced labor of enslaved Africans.
It's a sobering reminder that even something as enjoyable as a cup of coffee has this complex and sometimes painful history.
It does. As we enjoy our coffee today, it's so important to acknowledge the legacy and support efforts to make coffee production more ethical and sustainable.
Absolutely. Understanding the history helps us make better choices as consumers. And speaking of choices, I'm always overwhelmed by the sheer variety of coffee out there these days. Beans, roast, brewing methods, it's a lot.
It is. The world of coffee has become so diverse, and there are just so many different coffee experiences to be had.
I often get stuck in my coffee routine, ordering the same thing. But maybe it's time to explore a bit more. Any tips on how to navigate this coffee landscape?
Well, first of all, remember that taste is personal. What you like is what matters. There's no right or wrong. So don't hesitate to try all sorts of beans, different roasts, play with different brewing methods. It's all about discovering what suits your palate best.
That's a good point.
Uh,
I tend to stick with what I know, but maybe it's time to branch out a little.
exactly. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Baristas are usually super knowledgeable. They're passionate about coffee. They can point you towards new flavors, new experiences.
It's about being adventurous, asking those questions, and trusting my own taste buds.
That's it. It's a journey of discovery, and who knows what delicious coffee awaits you out there.
This reminds me of how we talked about the social history of coffee earlier. Those cave canes where people would gather, share ideas. It feels like even today, with all the different options we have, coffee still brings people together.
I think you're absolutely right. It's that basic human need for connection. Whether it's catching up with friends, sharing a morning ritual, or just enjoying a quiet moment alone, coffee somehow makes everyday life better.
It's more than a drink, it's an experience. It's a ritual, it's a connection. And that simple act of sharing a cup, it goes beyond cultures and time periods.
It does. And as the world of coffee continues to evolve, it'll be fascinating to see how it shapes our culture and keeps connecting us across borders.
Absolutely. But before we move on, I can't resist sharing one last fun fact. Did you know the coffee plant is technically a fruit?
Wait, what? A fruit? I always thought of it as a bean.
Believe it or not, the bean we roast and brew is actually the seed of a berry. They call it a coffee cherry, and they grow on coffee trees, which can get pretty tall, like 30 feet high.
Wow, I had no idea. That changes my whole perspective. It's amazing how much we can learn about things we take for granted every day.
I know, right? There are always new things to discover, even about the most familiar things.
Definitely. And speaking of discoveries, maybe we should brew up a final thought-provoking question for our listeners to ponder as we wrap up this coffee adventure.
All right, I'm all ears.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have in mind? Well, we've traveled from those Ethiopian highlands through centuries of history across continents, and we've seen how coffee has become this global phenomenon. But what about the future? What trends are brewing on the horizon?
Oh, that's a great question. The world of coffee is always evolving. There's always something new popping up. It's a pretty exciting time to be a coffee lover, that's for sure.
I agree. Even in the last few years, it's amazing how much has changed.
Yeah.
New gadgets, new ways to brew. It's mind-boggling. What are some of the innovations that have caught your eye?
Well, we've come a long way from those basic percolators. Cold brew has exploded in popularity. And then there's pour-over, AeroPress, even siphon brewing. If you want to get hands-on with your coffee, the options are endless.
It really does feel like coffee is this amazing blend of art and science. People are really getting into the process, experimenting to find that perfect cup.
You got it. And it's not just about the brewing either. There's this growing emphasis on specialty coffee. Those high-quality beans, ethically sourced, roasted to perfection.
So it's kind of like the difference between, say, a mass-produced wine and a carefully crafted vintage. You're appreciating the subtle flavors, the whole process.
Perfect analogy. Specialty coffee is all about those subtle nuances, understanding where those beans come from, and recognizing the artistry of the roasting process. It's all about savoring the experience.
It sounds delicious. But with all this focus on flavor and technique, are we losing sight of the bigger picture? What about the environmental impact of coffee production and the people who grow it?
You bring up a very important point. Sustainability is a huge focus in the coffee world these days. Consumers are becoming more aware of the impact their choices have, and they're looking for coffee that's produced responsibly.
So how do we ensure our coffee habits align with those values? What should we be looking out for?
Well, there are certifications like Fair Trade, Organic, and Rainforest Alliance. These are good indicators that the coffee was produced with both social and environmental responsibility in mind. They help ensure fair treatment for workers and protection for the environment.
Okay, good to know. I'll definitely be paying closer attention to those certifications. So with all these exciting trends brewing, what are you most excited about for the future of coffee?
For me, it's the growing appreciation for coffee as this truly global beverage, this fusion of coffee cultures and traditions. Coffee shops are becoming more diverse, offering a wider variety of brewing methods, beans from different origins, and all sorts of unique flavors. It's this wonderful blend of old and new.
So it's like coffee's bringing the world together, one delicious cup at a time.
Absolutely. It's not just about the coffee either. It's about the connections we make, the stories we share, the ideas we bounce around, and just those moments of pure joy that coffee brings to our lives.
Well said. What an incredible journey this has been. We've uncovered legends, traveled across the globe, and even learned some surprising facts along the way.
And we discovered that coffee is so much more than just a drink. It's this global force that connects people, fuels creativity, and makes our days a little bit brighter.
A huge thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this caffeinated adventure. We'd love to hear your coffee stories, so be sure to share your thoughts with us. Until next time, happy sipping.